Drug Development Disco, the LinkedIn Live series where we explore the vibrant intersection of science, capital, and commerce. I'm your host, Nick Mitchell, head of product with BioCentury, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Matt Krebs. Today's episode is titled Investing in Tomorrow, the Art of Early Discovery. We'll explore how biopharma leaders and investors identify groundbreaking assets that align with their strategic goals as well as their organizational capabilities. Joining us today is Joel Sandler, Associate Partner with Ipsos Healthcare Advisory Services. Joel's expertise spans scientific analysis, business development, and competitive intelligence, making him a trusted advisor to biopharma leaders around the world. Joel, we're thrilled to have you with us today. Your work translating data into actionable insights fits perfectly with today's theme, Investing in Tomorrow, the Art of Early Discovery. We would love for you to share a little bit about yourself and Ipsos.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Nick and Matt, BioCentury, for having me. I've never been on a LinkedIn Live event, and so I'm excited to be here. Feel like I'm very now, and I appreciate that. Yeah, so I would say at this point I can call myself a career consultant. I've been doing this for over 15 years. I have a training in basic sciences. I have a PhD and postdoctoral fellow. But then I left the lab about 15 years ago and really just fell in love with the idea of providing strategic guidance for clients in early clinical development or even preclinical development. And so at Ipsos Healthcare Advisory, which is a leading strategic advisory firm working with life sciences companies, we provide a range of support for biopharma companies, large and small. My area of expertise tends to be more with the small or the earlier stage companies. And so I would, if I have a mission, I would say it's to help my clients make informed and strategic decisions based on a comprehensive understanding of the science, the clinical and the commercial. And so that includes, I think, what we'll be talking about today is an understanding of what the data can tell us and what we can learn from the literature, as well as taking into account all sorts of things that companies need to worry about in terms of risk, clinical risk, commercial risk, how to balance the two, all with the intent of trying to inflect value, because these companies are often pre-commercial. They're not making money by definition. And so they need to make it to that next round of value inflection, that next round of capital infusion. And so really being able to understand from the other side of the table what those stakeholders are looking for and how my client companies can position themselves with their science to put their best foot forward and position themselves strategically for that next value inflection event and ultimately for the benefit of patients, hopefully.
Wow. Thanks, Joel. You've definitely put us off on the right course. A big thing that always comes up in these conversations is, of course, risk, and someone who is no stranger to risk or the conversation, our very own Matt Krebs. Matt, you tend to interact more with customers or clients who choose to go about this process of early asset discovery on their own. Would you like to tell us a little bit about how those conversations usually go, and maybe talk about some of the pitfalls that some of our listeners might want to focus on avoiding?
Yeah, absolutely. And Joel, it's actually good to see you again. We were in Nashville at the R&D Summit, the Grand Round. So thanks for joining. And yeah, Nick, one of the most common things that I see is smaller to mid-sized biopharmas that have staff drinking from a fire hose. Joel, I'm sure you can relate. You see this on the ground where they rely on a kind of pure brute force mentality, and they need systems and software and outside help in place to really assist them. They don't always know that those resources are out there. So this is especially true in early discovery and that translational landscaping aspect of things. My self-fulfilling advice would be, of course, reach out to companies like Ipsos and BioCentury and see if we can alleviate some of that pain. But also, and I've heard people do this and they do it well, reach out to peers in the industry and get granular about the solutions that other people are using. There's no one ring to rule them all kind of solution out there. So go out and ask for advice.
It's great insight, Matt. Thank you. Before we get too deep into the tools and the technology and the information and the data, I want to take a step back and focus for a second on why we chose to focus on this as an art form. That is, that asset discovery maybe requires more of an artful approach as opposed to a completely logistical or algorithmic approach to identifying assets that are of value. Joel, would you mind just giving a moment to this concept? Like, why is it important to think about the process of early asset discovery as an art form?
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to put it, Nick. It is an art form. I think it's easy for companies nowadays, especially in the age of ChatGPT, to go online and think that the solutions are there at their fingertips. And, to some extent, I mean, ChatGPT and generative AI will tell you what you want to hear, but it will tell your competition what they want to hear as well. And so I think you really need to get beyond that initial layer and be able to say, yes, what is the data? What is the body of evidence to support a particular strategic decision? And we'll get into, I think, more specifics around what we mean by the types of decisions that relate to this conversation. But just at a high level, have an appreciation for the data. Always be mindful of what the field can tell us based on past and ongoing experience. But each situation is going to be unique. And so taking into consideration not only the data and whatever a comprehensive analysis of a data set can tell you, but putting that into the context of the particular situation that you're sitting in. So for example, and I'm sure, again, we'll get to this, if you are thinking about which indication, which tumor type, if we're talking about cancer, that you want to prioritize, there's no one size fits all answer. Otherwise, everyone would go to that same tumor. And oftentimes people do go to that same cancer type. So having an understanding of that, and not only the ability to pursue something that might be de-risked from a technical standpoint, well, that then puts you into a very competitive and crowded space. And so really being able to navigate that balance of clinical and commercial risk, that's where I would say the art comes in. And there are people like myself and like you guys who've been thinking about this for a long time and who've spoken to a range of different stakeholders out there. And so it's not that we have a magic 8-ball or a crystal ball, but that experience combined with critical thinking about this for years and years, I think does make a strong case for putting yourself in the hands of trusted advisors.
That's a powerful framework. Thank you for that, Joel. It really speaks to the importance of having the experience and the background to exhibit that sort of situational awareness that is required for the context to know whether something you're looking at is the standard or is something that is truly innovative. So this is great. I'm wondering, though, now that we have put together this concept of the balance of intuition with analytical, can we focus a little bit more concretely, Joel, on maybe one or two past customers that you've facilitated moving through this process? Maybe you help them identify an innovation that was, directly actionable by them, or maybe you help them identify a competitive risk that led to them avoiding a potential misstep.
Yeah. Yeah. And, oftentimes I think when you're at that kind of platform stage in the therapeutic landscape, and I would say this is perhaps a little bit more applicable 5 years ago than it is today, but let's hope to get back to a place like this where you have early stage companies that are going out with pretty large, 8-9 figure early series rounds, and are still in what I would call that sandbox stage where they have an interesting technology, they have a scientific concept or IP that they've outlicensed, they've assembled a team, and yet surprisingly, they still don't know exactly what the application is that they're going to pursue. And so I've had situations like that, for example, in the case of cancer cell therapy, where clients say, we have this interesting, powerful technology. It addresses many of the shortcomings, potentially, of the technology that's already out there on the market or in later stages of clinical development. And yet we don't necessarily know exactly what to do with it. We don't know what cancer type to go after. We don't know which specific antigen target, tumor-associated antigen target to pursue. And so I think just kind of helping them think through what they're, putting a mirror in front of them and saying, all right, what are your corporate development objectives? Do you want to develop this in-house? Do you want to partner it? Do you want some balance of what we talked about, clinical and commercial risk? How do you position yourself optimally at the leading edge of innovation so that you're not entering a crowded competitive landscape, unless if you have a technology that really is not a better mousetrap, but something that you could argue is the best mousetrap. Then you could potentially go into some of those more crowded spaces. So I've had situations like that and help clients. I'm not going to de-identify anyone, but situations in that space, more recently in antibody drug conjugate space or targeted protein degradation, radioligand therapy, all these different approaches where you're leveraging a target to get you to a particular address, or maybe ablating tissue that's expressing that target, or knocking down that target, or knocking in that target. That's where I think, and you guys can tell me, but that's where I think, looking to the data to tell you, which of these has the strongest scientific rationale. How does that then line up with a particular company's, tolerance for risk and the technology that they're using to exploit that target?
That is an amazing perspective on the consultative approach to working with customers who are looking at this when they are engaging, of course, with a very capable consultant like Joel. Matt, there are, of course, occasions when you are interacting with companies or teams that are going at this in a little bit of a different fashion. They are probably more focused on identifying the data and some level of analytical insight. What's it like to work with those customers? What kinds of things do they look for?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Great question. One of the biggest challenges that I find is people managing the sheer volume of data. So when they're sifting through biomedical journals, publications, patents, clinical data, it's really easy to get overwhelmed, that drinking from the fire hose again analogy. So without the right tools, opportunities, and competitors can fall through the cracks. Actually, I have a kind of a story about this, and it's just ingrained in my head. I was on the phone several years ago with a leadership team member from Nimbus Therapeutics. They had an IRAK4 compound that was in development, and they told me that they found a big institution, I think it was NIH or maybe even A-Star in Singapore, that was developing an IRAK4 for an indication they didn't know it was applicable to. It was completely off the radar. And BioCentury, through one of the first iterations of our BioCentury Innovation Distillery, it really helped them identify that opportunity that would have been missed, literally just off the radar for them. And that's what it's all about. It's, I've heard this use case time and time again since then, where people found an opportunity, whether by mechanism, by indication, it was off of the radar. So yeah, that's what it's all about. I actually have a Zoom call coming in. I got to send a voicemail. Sorry about that. Hopefully that didn't pop up on the screen.
Thanks, Matt. That's a great point, and it kind of comes back to one of Joel's earlier statements where we have to be careful of this sort of confirmation bias where, in Joel's example, Chat GPT may tell you something that feels right and looks very interesting and is probably what you already know, but the value of doing this true mining of the literature or analytics with validated tools is actually learning something that you don't already know, and yet you can trust that new information as being valid and valuable. So I think this is a really good time for us to transition into focusing more on the tools or the data that are available for people to approach early asset detection, particularly from the perspective or the data source of biomedical literature. Matt, are you willing and able to kind of transition us into a more focused look at BioCentury's dedicated tool for this, the Innovation Distillery?
Absolutely. Well, let me first start by sharing the screen, and I'll kind of set the stage. I'll give kind of a macro view, and then Joel and Nick, I'll kind of dive in a little bit on a specific use case from there. So this is the product that we're talking about, the Innovation Distillery dashboard, and this was built with people and industry leaders like Joel in mind. It's a versatile tool that can boil that vast ocean of emerging science into a more digestible, targeted, kind of relevant pool of assets. What really sets this apart are three key things. First, we prioritize high value assets and only spotlight studies with disease modifying potential. That identifying science with disease modifying potential really is that huge time saver, value add, and it's looking at innovations that are ready for therapeutic development. We'll get in a little bit more about what that means when we dive into the tool. Second is we literally map the connections between publications, patents, mechanisms, targets, and the corporate entities and institutions developing them. So when you think about that art of innovation, that palette table is right there for you. You can visualize it. It begins to help you map. And when Joel, you're thinking about that, commercial versus clinical risk, these are the types of things that you can see and map out on here. And then third point, just to kind of give that last point in the big view. We provide expert curated summaries with actionable insights on each one of the translational briefs. And what that means, let me just scroll down below and show you. Each one of the translational items down below here are a concise 200-word translational brief, really giving you immediate insights into its therapeutic potential and relevance to you. So, Joel, I know that BioCentury's tools and services in terms of some of the other landscaping tools. This is relatively new for you. I thought one of the use cases that came up and you mentioned was using a platform technology company in mind and thinking about, how do we hone in and narrow something by indication if they're thinking about going down two routes. Let me paint the picture and then I'll ask you a question about what that could potentially mean, like trying to get into your head and how you would think about helping clients. So what I'm going to do is put in let's say pancreatic cancer and prostate cancer, just two sample searches. And then what that did is dynamically filter the filter sets where you're narrowing in by the number of targets associated with the translational briefs for these two indications. You can see the institutions developing them, and even the lead researcher that's the investigators for the particular projects here. That's a lot to digest all in one little kind of summary. The last thing here, just to note before I ask you a question, Joel, innovation on innovation. So within this translational, brief kind of drill down in prostate and pancreatic cancer, we're looking at there it is, two sets of new targets or new compounds. So you can see something that's true new to this, and what if I were to filter those out, what are the associated targets with those? These are really kind of really upstream assets. So I've talked a lot, Joel. I'm going to ask you. When you see this in the context of when you were thinking about that balance of clinical and commercial risk and going down different pathways, what kind of jumps out at you?
Yeah, I mean, this is incredibly powerful. I think this is the kind of work that we would have done up until, I guess, a few weeks ago when this tool became available. We would have done a lot of this manually. And so having this available, I think, arms someone like myself or my clients themselves, which could be the biotech company that's thinking about how to build up their pipeline. Perhaps they are a company with a mission or a set of investors that say, go cure pancreatic cancer, God bless. That's a very tough space. There's been a lot of clinical failure, particularly late stage failure. That suggests that markets and potential partners are going to be reticent to partner something. So if I could zero in on targets with clinical or preclinical or robust in vitro validation data without having to search through a million different papers, that's going to allow me to go directly to the heart of the question, get into these targets for my client, or if I'm the client themselves, get into those specific questions. Or if I'm an investor, if I'm a venture capitalist and I'm trying to think about what opportunities might be out there, I see you can go to China, you can go to, Eastern Europe, you can go to Australia. You can look in areas where, may not be top of mind for American investors that are in a position where they have to find the next great thing. So yeah, I mean, I haven't, full disclosure, I haven't spent nearly as much time as I want to in this. I am a BCIQ subscriber, and so I plan to get in there. But at first blush, I think this looks, really powerful.
Really appreciate that feedback in the comments there. And one thing that jumped out at me was when I actually can't remember if that was today or yesterday when we were on the phone. The ability to then look at like standard of care and see what else is available and see like the macro view from here. And this is more, and I'm just jumping from one of the targets that came out from the translational space that we were looking at that was applicable to prostate cancer, and then to see where it is in, let me refresh this, sorry, where it is in this target profile. So we're going from the translational dashboard to this view, which is more the view I think, Joel, you're used to seeing in the database, and seeing, of the cancer assets, where are, okay, there's clinical milestones due to occur, like this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is where some of your mindset goes, going from the translational space to here. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're obviously if you are trying to position yourself at that optimal, kind of pivot point between clinical and commercial risk, you want to see what the leading edge is. You want to see what those milestones look like. When is something going to read out? What is it going to tell you about the validation of the target, if we're talking about a target within that, prostate cancer? What does it tell you potentially about headroom for improvement? Perhaps you can, and this is something with antibody drug conjugates, for example, that you can drug the same target with a number of different chemical warheads or linker technologies. And all of a sudden, you're in a position where you can make a case for, yes, there's a program out in front and they're probably going to get FDA approval, but they're really just setting the table so that we can come in and win. That's the type of information I would want to understand as an early stage company or as a service provider for a company like that.
Absolutely. I actually literally couldn't have said it any better. I'm going to now turn the tables over to Nick and just see, Nick, is there anything that I missed that you would like to highlight here?
Thanks, guys. There were a couple of things that came out of the last exchange that I thought were really powerful. So one of those was that, we've created this situation where you can have a perspective or a view of very early stage innovations that are coming out of the biomedical literature. And then you can pretty quickly pivot on the factor of a target to understand what the therapeutic pipeline looks like for that specific target. And this was, I'm plugging on BCIQ and the Innovation Distillery here, but this was one of the things that we really heard from customers is make it easier for us to really seamlessly go from one stage of development to the next and seeing how those things, fit together. And Joel, you've done a great job of course, starting with the end in mind and thinking about the unmet need and the regulatory challenges of getting there. And I think that you guys have really done an excellent job of painting this picture of the complete life cycle and the data that we're trying to provide to facilitate good or better decision making. Yeah. Joel, as you look at this and you think about how we're structuring some of the data, we've made it possible for people to explore by disease, but we've also made it possible for people to explore by origin. I know you're going to spend some more time in here, but are there other things about the way that this data is being presented that you think make it very useful for yourself or for other biotech, biopharma clients?
Yeah. I think Matt's example earlier of Nimbus, and IRAC4 and being able to float to the surface for them an application with a drug that they may already have, or they may at least have a lead molecule that they can then, through medicinal chemistry, I think, I know Nimbus is small molecule. So through computational and structure activity relationship, kind of evolve, a drug against that same target for a completely different indication. that's kind of you have kind of the reverse engineering approach where you start from the indication and work back and figure out what are all the different targets. And then the forward engineering approach, which is what target do you have? What's your hammer in search of a nail? And what are all the different nails that are out there? We just saw Jazz yesterday get an approval for a HER2, of all things, given how many HER2 drugs there are out there. But they got an approval in biliary tract cancer where HER2 is expressed. It is associated with poor prognosis. It's a small indication, but one with incredibly high unmet medical need. And so being able to take your HER2 targeting asset, which may ultimately be best in class in breast cancer or gastric cancer, but if you're a small company, not that Jazz is small, but the company Zymeworks that they acquired was on the smaller side. If you're a smaller company and you're trying to figure out what's your initial path to market, having an understanding of all the different applications that you can go after, and who are the investigators, where are the centers of excellence? Maybe they're not in obvious places. Maybe they are in East Asia or somewhere you wouldn't necessarily expect. That I think will be a lot of fun once I get into this and poke around, especially in the context of a client engagement. So I look forward to that.
That's great. Thanks, Joel. This has been an excellent way for us to approach both the data and the art of accomplishing a successful early asset discovery program. Joel and Matt, you've done a fantastic job. Can't thank you both enough for joining us today. As we look ahead to 2025, BioCentury is here to help you navigate the complexities and ever-evolving challenges of drug development. If you'd like to learn more about the Innovation Distillery or BCIQ, please reach out to Matt for a one-on-one consultation. And thanks again for joining us on Drug Development Disco. Stay curious, keep innovating, and we'll see you next time.